let's watch the GOP schism on full display. Here is the good old-fashioned corporate media, but as represented by the best of them, MSNBC, talking about it.
Tonight, Donald Trump wrapping up his speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference just a short time ago. We're going to do you a favor. We are not going to show you any sound bites from his speech because it was just as dissociated from the real world as all of his recent speeches. But we can report that the CPAC crowd loved it, and he won the conference's straw poll. And that's only notable because Trump was about the only person at the conference this week who enjoyed such a warm reception. Hardly anyone showed up to Nikki Haley's address. See it there on your screen. You could practically hear crickets when Mike Pompeo decided to speak. But Republicans, well, they came out in force for Trump tonight. As Charlie Sykes wrote for MSNBC.
Oh, let's just go back and enjoy that a little bit more. Ooh, look at that. Yeah, it's not exactly what I would call a overwhelming movement at the moment. Good Lord.
But Republicans, well, they came out in force for Trump tonight. As Charlie Sykes wrote for MSNBC.com this week, during the Trump era, CPAC evolved from a gathering of Republican Spitfires and alt-right oddballs to a straight-up MAGA cult. Don't forget, 2 years ago, there was a golden Trump statue at the conference. Some on the right are saying the conference should be named TPAC because it caters to one man and one man alone. Look at all the big Republican names not attending this year's conference. Of course, the biggest name, Ron DeSantis. You also have Mike Pence, Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel. The only attendees appear to be former Trump officials or...
Hold on. I don't know that Ron DeSantis is really the biggest name. A lot of the support for him is AstroTurf, and we're going to get into that in a moment, why that's important, where that AstroTurf is being supplied. But I don't necessarily agree with the idea that it's a big deal that Ron DeSantis didn't go there. Also, remember, Ron DeSantis recently kicked out a bunch of Trump supporters from an event he was at. He had mall security kick him out. He doesn't have friends at CPAC at the moment, and I'm going to assume that his poor showing isn't going to bode well for him in the primaries. It does. As I say that, though, I realize Trump may very well be in prison. 2024, in terms of an election, is a long way off. It's really weird, in fact, that we run elections basically for half of our lives in America. Half of our lives are election season. There are countries, this is not a joke, there are countries where your campaigning is limited to a couple of weeks before Election Day. That might even be too little, but there are other countries where your campaigning is limited to a couple of months within Election Day. I, honest to God, think that is what we should do in this country. We should insist. We could just do it through a small change. We could say you cannot spend at all from your massive stockpile of whatever until 1 year until the election day. That, I think, would be more reasonable, for God's sake.
Trump fanatics, like conspiracy theorist Carrie Lake, conspiracy theorist Mike Lindell, conspiracy theorist Marjorie Taylor Greene. Not even Fox is safe, folks. Former Trump strategist Steve Bannon was met with a standing ovation when he effectively declared war on Rupert Murdoch and his empire, vowing to destroy the network for turning its back on Trump. Now, we have to acknowledge
something else before we move on to Matt Schlapp's sexual assault, or sexual assaulting of somebody else. He's a creep. But it's important to note, Steve Bannon was pardoned during Trump's last day in office. Steve Bannon was pardoned for scamming Trump supporters. Just remember the kind of folks we're dealing with.
One elephant in the room at CPAC. and that is its chief organizer, Matt Schlapp. He is facing a $9.4 million sexual assault lawsuit from a former staffer for failed Senate candidate Herschel Walker. Schlapp has vigorously denied the assault allegations. The headline should be the lead of all CPAC-related coverage this week, but it has become almost a footnote because the conference is so mired in chaos and infighting and, of course, Trump love. Joining me now is the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington. Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming back on the show. You know, much has been made of the conspicuous absences that we're seeing on this week's CPAC guest list. Some are calling it evidence of a split between the extremists on one side and the so-called normies in the GOP, which I don't think there are any. Do you think that is the right framing, or what is your understanding as to why we're seeing CPAC become what it has become?
Well, Eamon, it's so good to see you. Thanks for having me back on. I think that Republicans are in a massive identity crisis. They are in disarray. They are in ruin. And the problem for Republicans is that these conspiracy theorists.
Hold on. I just want to say, I think she's having a little bit of fun there. It is so common around the election season to hear people say Democrats in disarray on corporate media. That's like a phrase that they love to do. This is actual disarray. This is an actual schism we're seeing form. It has been predicted by your old pal Jake and other more prescient minds before. And I mean, I love to see it, but I think she's having a bit of fun turning that old annoying phrase on its head.
These people who have, who are leaders of CPAC, sexual assault lawsuit against the CEO of it, and the things that are being said at CPAC are so extreme that not even Republican leaders want to go to it. The problem, of course, is that Trump is still very popular there, and Trump still commands a significant percentage of the Republican base. So I'm not sure how they're going to resolve this crisis, because clearly they understand that Trump and the extreme Republicans put the Republican brand at risk. That's why so many are staying away. But on the other hand, Trump is the Republican brand. And that is a problem for them. That's why they lost so many races, including Herschel Walker, including so many across the country, because Trump insisted on these extreme MAGA candidates. And the people that showed up are the ones who are still willing to embrace that one-man cult.
Can you talk to me about the danger of this identity crisis for a moment? Because we look at some crazy oddball Republicans on a state level doing things, whether it be in Florida or Texas. You're talking about the identity crisis that's at play here with CPAC all under the control of Trump and the conspiracy theorists. But
Catherine Wolfe, left is indeed best. Heck yes. I want to chime in. Oh, I'm sorry there, Eamon. I want to chime in. There's no danger. There's no danger in the Republicans not being unified. All the evil things that they are trying to do now, they were trying to do before as well, just with more subtlety. And by subtlety, I really just mean a wall of confusion. If you take, for example, their Social Security, a tax, their attempts to get rid of it, we can say back and forth between us, yeah, they're trying to cut Social Security, because people had to do the work of deciphering what they meant by entitlement reforms, what they meant by all the rhetoric they used, which ended up just being a bunch of lies. But the point is, what would the effect of that have been if they were successful in let's say, one of their plans, raising the age of Social Security? Well, that would mean a bunch of 65-year-olds would have to work until they were 70. A lot of whom wouldn't be able to, because by the time you're 65, the odds that you've acquired a health problem that prevents you from doing the job that you did when you were 30 is pretty decent. It's realistic to take that into account. So they would have put a bunch of people out on the street. I will grant this to Eamon, though, who's, by the way, wonderful young buck out there reading the news. I like him, but I'll give him this as well. There are more direct calls. Not that there weren't any before, but there are more direct calls for straight up domestic terrorism from MAGA. So I'll give him that. There is danger, literal danger there.
Under the control of Trump and the conspiracy theorists, but how dangerous is it for the Republican Party, for this country, for them to be continuing down this road?
It's extremely dangerous, and that's why I don't really, I don't smile when I talk about this, because it is not a good situation when such a significant stage has been given to conspiracy theorists, to right-wing extremists, to people who spread disinformation, fear, all kinds of things that do real violence. I was listening to the segment that you just had with the attorney generals, and I once again want to just be clear that the kind of violence that Donald Trump unleashed on the country during his term as president, leading up to January 6th, and continuing with events at people's homes, as I saw myself with a gunman at my house, this kind of violence is all directly linked to this hate, this disinformation, these conspiracy theorists, not to mention that the threat of our democracy being ignored, being taken over by these conspiracy theorists, people who don't want to respect the fair and free results of an election. That is a very serious country. And these people still have a huge platform out there with, even though Republicans,
Okay, so just to highlight what I was talking about before, about the same things being done in the past, just with more subtlety. Let's talk about respect. And again, I'm not disagreeing with her. I think she's correct. I just want to make the scale of the problem clear and the villains in this story also quite clear. Because the old school Republicans aren't good guys. MAGA needs to be full-on stopped, like handcuffs stopped. The MAGA is a domestic terrorist organization, in my opinion. And I don't say that as a exaggeration. I mean, they are literally, in my opinion, an organization for domestic terrorists. But let's not also forget that in 2000, the whole election, the presidency, came down to Florida. Who intervened on behalf of George W. Bush? Jeb Bush, his brother. We allowed that to happen because we were too respectful. We were too respectful of the opposition. We allowed the narrative about Republicans to exist, that they were equal in some way. They were as legitimate in some way as the Democratic Party. No, they weren't. At the time, they were under a consent decree that prevented them, a court order, in other words, that prevented them from having poll watchers at the polls. Why was that? Well, because they had sent armed thugs to intimidate people at the polls. And they were given the choice. Either you agree to stop having any presence at all at polls, because you cannot be trusted, Republican Party. You cannot be trusted to do this, like the Democrats can, because they are a legitimate political organization. So either you agree to do that, or we're going to court, or this is going to be a massive embarrassment for you, and you know how it's going to be found because you ordered armed thugs to be at the polls. That is the decree they were under at the time. Only got lifted in 2018, and it shouldn't have been, for the record. That was the court order they were under, and we treated them like they were a normal political party. They did some corrupt things in Florida by having Jeb Bush say, nope, my brother won Florida. We did not fight that. We could have kept fighting. And I say we, I mean decent Americans, Democrats at the time. Democrats did not fight that. And later, when the state was independently recounted, guess who it turns out got the majority of the votes in that state? It was Al Gore. In other words, when 9/11 happened, Al Gore should have been president. When we went to war for 20 years because George W. Bush lied about it, Al Gore should have been in that place instead. And we would not have gone to war for 20 years because, as far as we can tell, he does not lie about these things because he's like a normal human being that doesn't commit crimes like it's nothing. He cares a lot about environmental concerns. He cares a lot about global warming, Al Gore does. George W. Bush didn't. He loosened EPA regulations. We would have had Al Gore in office instead of George W. Bush. We would have been less screwed than we are now. I wouldn't have watched a home fall into Lake Michigan if Al Gore had been president. And on and on and on. George W. Bush stopped us from calling white domestic extremists terrorists, even when they were doing terrorism things. It goes on. I'm just saying, be wary of the other side of this schism. Although, again, I want to say I don't disagree with anything Jayapal's saying here.
Republicans stayed away from CPAC. They're not denouncing CPAC. They're not denouncing Trump or these ideas in the way that they should. And so this continues to be a massive problem for our democracy and for basic civility in our country.
I want to ask you, if I can, switching for a moment gears here, about the pandemic-era expansion of food assistance funding of SNAP benefits, which expired this week, something that was just so crucial and served as a lifeline during the pandemic. How dire is this situation? You're the chair of the Progressive Caucus. This is obviously something that you championed, and I think a lot of people, progressives on the left, championed.
This is dire. And I just want to make clear for anyone who's listening, SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This is the money that gets food to people who are hungry. And what we saw during the pandemic is by extending SNAP benefits, by adding the child tax credit, we were able to cut child poverty in half. And it made it clear, Eamon, that poverty is a policy choice. Hunger is a policy choice. We have the power to change it, and it's with very little money. I mean, we're talking about, just in my state of Washington, 500,000 people will lose $171 a month. Across the country, 32 million people are going to be pushed onto this hunger cliff.
Hold on. Think about that for a moment. I don't know how tight your budget is at home, but to me, having groceries suddenly become more expensive, which is what she's saying here, more expensive by $171 would be devastating. And I'm not on SNAP. So imagine that you have the kind of money in your bank account where you require assistance to pay for food, to feed your family. I have the benefit of being a childless crone. So imagine I had a couple of little scamps to feed, and suddenly I have to pay an additional $171 out of my budget. Some of us would be skipping meals. I don't like that when I imagine it for me. So I don't like it when I imagine it for her constituents. I don't like it when I imagine it for any human being. If you require SNAP, I mean, it's just insane to me that we would allow this to happen. I hope that you will contact your representatives regarding SNAP benefits and tell them that there is, of course, a link to contact your representatives in the descriptions. Is there? I'm going to make sure there is. But contact your representative and make sure they are aware that you don't want SNAP benefits cut and you want them speaking out against it.
And we know that hunger is already so much worse than it was even pre-pandemic. So this is a horrific thing. Republicans, by the way, in the House are proposing cutting SNAP even further, supposedly to take care of the deficit, when we know that we could raise taxes, as President Biden has proposed, on the wealthiest billionaires and get in enormous amounts of money that would far outweigh anything we would get by cutting these essential benefits to families.
Let me get your thoughts as well on this Texas lawsuit that could determine the fate of medication abortion access nationwide. You have this judge, Trump appointee. He has a history of siding with conservatives on this issue. What is at stake? How could this affect your constituents? And how does this country fight it?
Well, this was a clear case of forum shopping, looking for a judge, a Trump-appointed judge, who would give a ruling that would essentially overturn the FDA's ruling that medication abortion is safe. It has been safe for 20 years. It's been used around the world. And I just want you to think, Eamon, and anybody who's listening, about the implications not only for this medication abortion, but also for any medication that the FDA has approved that any judge could suddenly decide to overturn it. Now, the consequences also for women across this country, pregnant people across this country who are trying to get abortions is dire. And this, this will, of course, affect the people of color, the poorest people who can't afford to travel across state lines. This is going to affect even states like mine, where we have legalized abortion and protected it. But this is going to have a massive effect across the country. It will be a terrible ruling, not only for abortion and women's freedoms, but also for all medication.
No disagreements there. Oh, I see what I've done. No disagreements there. The cuts, the ridiculous attack on medication abortion, of course, is insane. The whole interview is linked in the description. That's Camilla Jayapal. I gotta tell you, anytime she's on TV, I recommend listening to what she has to say. She is a sharp lady. But what can you do about this schism in the GOP? Couple of things. Number one, vote in primaries. They're coming up. There is a schism. We are anticipating that one of the effects of this is going to be people leaving the GOP. Where are they going to go? They're going to go to the Democrats. That means we're going to have right-leaning forces dragging Democrats to the right. We need to make sure there are forces pulling the other way. So I guess I should do it like this. Dragging Democrats to the right, we got to have forces pulling the other way, pulling them to the left. Easily accomplished. Vote in primaries. It's that simple. Go as far left as you can. As far as SNAP benefits, which I also feel is important, contact your representative. I've updated the description now. If you refresh the page, it should show up. Contact them and simply say, I want you to expand SNAP benefits. Don't shrink them, expand them. Don't cut this additional 170, yada, yada, yada. I want you to restore all of that funding because hungry people in America shouldn't exist. We have enough wheat. We have enough cows. Sorry, old fella. We have enough food. Let us feed the hungry. It's that simple. It doesn't matter what party you're in. If you're a Republican, I presume you're obsessed with Jesus, and good for you. I'm glad you enjoy that. Jesus would have fed the hungry. You can do it. You don't have to do a miracle. All you have to do is contact your representative. You don't got to create fish. You got to write an email. So write the email.